In this video, I'm going to show you how to start a project on double pointed needles, otherwise called DPNs. In this demo, I'll be starting my mid-coast mitts pattern, a simple fingerless mitt design. I'll be using the worsted weight Barocco Ultra Wool in size 6 and 7 double pointed needles. You'll also need stitch markers. I'll be making the smallest size, so I need to cast on 32 stitches on these size 6 needles to start. So because there's not a lot of stitches, I'm actually just going to cast on all of the stitches onto one of the double pointed needles, and then we'll transfer them to the other ones. So to start, I'm going to do the long tail cast on, and I like using the thumb method of it, so I will show you that. So to do the long tail, I just need to make sure to have a long enough tail to cast on those 32 stitches. I usually just eyeball it like this, where I sort of pinch it and I say, okay, I need to make sure I have enough to cast on at least 10 stitches worth. So that looks about 10, 20, 30, and then I have 2 more, so about that. This usually gives me a really long tail, but I'd much rather long than not long enough. So then I will do my slip knot. And I do have a separate video on exactly how to do this cast on that goes much slower than I'll be doing right here. So if you're new to this particular cast on, make sure to watch that particular video. Okay, so I'm going to cast on the 32 stitches just onto this one double pointed needle. Okay, so I've casted on my 32 stitches onto one of the double pointed needles. Now I want to distribute these stitches so that they are on a total of 3 DPN needles. If you had a lot more stitches, then you could use 4, but for this pattern, 3 is enough. Here's my tip on how to know how many stitches to put on each DPN. The most amount should go on your first, and the least amount should go on your last, with the second one having a number in between the two. This will all make sense a bit later, I promise. So in terms of my 32 stitches here, I'm first going to transfer 14 stitches onto this double pointed. So to transfer, you're just going to insert your free DPN here as if you're purling. So into the front of the stitch, just like that, and then just slide it off of that needle and onto this one. So we're going to slide 14 just like this. Okay, so I've slid 14 onto that one. Then I'm going to take another DPN and I am going to slide 10 stitches onto this one. So in the same way, so I'm just gonna, it's kind of gonna be above, holding it above the other DPN you had just slid stitches onto. Just insert it, oops, purl-wise, just like that. There we go. And we will slide 10. And 10. Okay. And then that leaves, should leave 8 stitches on this. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There we go. So now I'm going to, just to be able to see things better, slide all the stitches kind of towards the middle of the double pointed. And then you want to turn it so that your working yarn is coming from this needle here. So I'm just going to place this down here. So this is our first needle, which had the most amount of stitches on it, 14. Then our second needle here has 10, and then our last needle here has 8, and our working yarn is coming from this side. I have a bit of a long tail here, so just so that it doesn't get confused with the working yarn, I'm just going to trim it up a bit. There we go. Okay, so here's our working yarn. So now what we want to do is we want to push the stitches that are on the first double pointed towards the bottom tip here. And you want to do the same for the third needle, the one that's attached to the working yarn. I'm just going to slide it towards the tip. Now I want to place a beginning of round marker. So I'm going to go ahead and place a beginning of round marker on this third needle here. Again, this is the one with the working yarn attached to it. Now, typically when working with DPNs, you are always working your stitches off of one DPN and onto an empty DPN. That's what this fourth DPN is for. But when first starting out, you need to secure that beginning of round marker. So you need to work some initial stitches right onto this double pointed needle. And that way you'll have some stitches on that side, and that way the marker won't fly off. So in this pattern, it's a knit 2, purl 2 pattern. So I'm actually going to work 4 stitches first right onto this third double pointed. So to do that, you just need to reorient the needles a bit. Oop, my marker fell off. That can happen. So just put it right back on there. Okay, so you just want to go ahead and I'm going to do knit 2 and then purl 2. And that was why that third double pointed, I said to have less stitches on it, because I knew we were going to be and the first one having more stitches because I knew we were going to be transferring the stitches from the first onto the third to secure that beginning of round marker. Okay, so now let me put this back down so that we can see. So now we have our marker secured on this needle. So now we're going to begin our official knitting in the round with double pointed needles process. So this is where you're going to take your free double pointed needle. You're going to raise your work up. The working yarn is always going to be coming from the last stitch on the double pointed that's right to the right of the one that you're working on. So see how it's coming right from that last stitch there. So let me take my free needle. I'm going to insert it into the next stitch on the next double pointed. Take the working yarn, wrap it around, and knit that stitch. Then because I'm working in a knit 2, purl 2 pattern, I'm just going to bring the yarn to the front and then do my purl 2. Now, one tip I have is I like to try to make sure that the other stitches on the other needles are a little bit more towards the center, just so that you don't wind up having any stitches falling off of the needles. So just keep an eye on it, and if you need to move any stitches towards the center of the DPN, you could just do that. Okay, so now I've worked all the stitches from this DPN onto this one. And so then this becomes my free DPN. So then I'm just going to move to the next double pointed. I'm going to move those stitches towards the tip. Again, the working yarn is coming from the DPN that's right to the right. Now, I finished with a knit 2. So my first 2 stitches here are going to be purl 2. So I just want to make sure that the working yarn is in the front before I insert my needle into the first stitch. So I'm going to insert it purlwise since I need to purl 2. And then I'll do knit 2, purl 2 to the end. And just like before, I'm just going to slide the stitches more towards the center on the other needle just to make sure that nothing falls off. This is also why I tend to prefer wooden double pointed needles. Until you really get used to working this technique, I wouldn't recommend metal because it can be really slippery. But once you get the hang of it, then metal can work quite nicely. Okay, so now I've worked all the stitches on that double pointed. I'm gonna move these a little bit. And then I'm ready to work this one. So again, I'm just going to push the next DPN stitches towards the needle tip. I'm going to make sure that my working yarn is coming from the DPN that's right to the right of it. Now I ended on a purl 2, so I need to knit 2. So I'm just going to make sure the yarn is in the back. And I will go ahead and continue the knit 2, purl 2 until I get to the marker. When you knit that last stitch, see how loose it looks? That's totally to be expected. What I like to do is I just take my tail and I just cinch it up just a little bit. Okay, so I finished my last purl stitch. I'm at my beginning of round. So I'm gonna slip the marker. Now in this pattern, it says to work in knit 2, purl 2 for a particular number of inches. So I'm ready to just continue in that same process. And again, see how after that first round, it might look a little loose right here. That is normal. Don't worry about it. It should sort of cinch up a little bit the more that you work more rounds. And if for any reason it still looks a little bit loose when you're weaving in ends, you can use this tail here to sort of tighten anything up there. Okay, so I've finished that. I'm going to slide the stitches towards the center of the double pointed. Then on my next double pointed, I'm just going to slide the stitches towards the tip. Because I ended on a purl 2, I'm going to insert this with the working yarn in the back so I can go ahead and knit. Okay, so you're just going to continue in this same pattern where you're just going to constantly be working stitches off of one double pointed. When you get to the end, you just turn it, you slide the stitches towards the end of the next double pointed. And the key here is always making sure that the working yarn is coming from the DPN that's right to the right of where you want to work. So if you ever put your work down and you go take care of some errands and then you come back and you're wondering, where am I on all of this? Look for your working yarn. So if your working yarn is coming from here, then you know, okay, that must mean that I'm ready to work the stitches that are on this double pointed right here. Now I want to show you one other tip, and that is if you need to reorient how your stitches are, if you start making decreases or doing anything like that, and you want to be able to move stitches, let's say you want to move some stitches from this needle onto this needle, let me show you how you would do that. It's very simple. So first, you just want to slide these stitches towards this tip. And then I'm going to take this double pointed and slide them towards here. And then all you need to do is just insert one double pointed purlwise into this one and just slide them over, just like that. And then just reorient everything again. Just like that. So one additional tip is what to do when it says to switch your needle size. So in my Midcoast mitts, after you do the cuff on the size 6 needles, it says when you're working the body of the mitt to switch to the US 7 double pointeds. So it's very simple. So if let's say I'm ready to transition to the size 7, you would just use that as your free needle. So here's my US 7 needle. That becomes my free needle. And then, so I would use that to start working all of my stitches. So then when I get to the end here, instead of this needle then becoming my free needle that works these stitches, I'm going to take this because this is my US 6 and I'm going to put it aside. And then I'm going to take my next US 7. And that is the needle I will use to work all of those stitches. So that's all you have to do. You just have to remember on that round that you're switching your needle size, that once you work all of the stitches on one of the old needles onto one of the new, then you take that old needle, put it aside, grab your next new size, and you do that for all of your needles. So that is how you get started and work in the round using double pointed needles.